Take it away.
Introducing Roy Joel Zeff at 10 o'clock sharp on a Wednesday morning as we zip along on Zoom for part with Efrat Kollel for part 7 of Mashiach and Messianism.
Hi, everybody. The last time that we met last week, we discussed whether or not there's a textual basis for the claim that you could have a Messiah who died without completing the messianic to-do list, the messianic agenda. But then when there's a resurrection of the dead, that he will come back, as it were, the second coming, if you'll pardon the expression, and he will then still be the Mashiach, and he'll complete the messianic agenda. Now, why is that an idea worth exploring? Well, first of all, it's interesting to explore it because obviously it is evocative of a different religion. But particularly what's interesting is in the past years since Lubavitch Rebbe, the most recent Lubavitch Rebbe passed away, there were some claims among Chabad that he was the Mashiach and is the Mashiach. Well, if he's the Mashiach, where's the Beit HaMikdash, where's the Holy Temple, and where's the complete ingathering of the exiles, world peace, universal recognition of God, etc. So the answer would be, well, he's going to come back, the second coming, and then finish the job. The question is there any source for that? So we saw last time that there is a fascinating passage in Masechet Sanhedrin that asks the question that who's the Mashiach? Can we identify him? And it says, well, if he's from the living, it's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the editor of the Mishnah. And if he's from the dead, it's Daniel, the prophet Daniel. Now, that passage seems to be suggestive. If you say it's Daniel is the Mashiach, how can he be the Mashiach? He's dead, right? So the Abarbanel we saw seems to interpret that passage as that he is the Mashiach. And when the resurrection of the dead takes place, which is a doctrine that is fundamental to Judaism, when that takes place, so he will resume his messianic responsibilities and will finish off the messianic to-do list. So that does a precedent for an idea of a second coming, as it were. I just want to point out.
So that just means the Mashiach is after Techiyat HaMeitim, in other words?
Yeah, according to that theory, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to happen this way. But in order to suggest that Mashiach will be someone who participates, be a beneficiary of resurrection of the dead, you'd have to say that that Mashiach, that Techiyat HaMeitim will happen before Mashiach.
Which puts it in the supernatural realm. I mean,
well, everybody agrees that resurrection of the dead is supernatural. It doesn't necessarily imply anything about the messianic era fundamentally. We'll discuss that today. That's going to be the main topic for today. Okay, but now I want to take a step back for a second. And a question was raised last time by our good friend Bruce. And I can't say that I literally lost sleep over it, but it was close to losing sleep over it. I really spent quite a bit of time thinking about it. And I'd like to share what the question was. I would like to tell you why it's important, and then tell you my current thinking in trying to answer the question. Okay, the question is the following. Rashi, on that passage in the Talmud, gives two different ways of interpreting that passage. Okay, we'll just focus on the if he's from the dead, it's Daniel. If you translate the words of the Talmud literally, the words say, if the Mashiach is from the dead, it's like Daniel, the Hebrew word like, kagon, like Daniel. So Rashi interprets that passage in two ways. The first way he interprets is, if the Mashiach is from the dead, it's Daniel. Now, Rashi doesn't say he'll be resurrected and finish the job. That's the Abarbanel, right? Rashi doesn't play out the details of how that would work. So the first interpretation is, if he's from the dead, it's Daniel. And then he points out, if we say that, we're going to have to interpret the word like differently. it can't mean if he's from the dead, he's like Daniel. If he's from the dead, the Mashiach is, if Daniel's the Mashiach, then when it says like Daniel, don't take the word like literally. That's one explanation of Rashi. The other explanation of Rashi is that if you're looking for an example of the messianic personality, someone who is saintly and suffered greatly, that's how Rashi understands the fundamental characteristics here. So then, if you're looking for an example, it would be somebody like Daniel. So those are the two explanations in Rashi. Either we're looking for a paradigm of the messianic personality, or we're actually looking for the Mashiach, okay, among the living or among the dead. Now, Bruce asked the question last time, why does Rashi offer two different explanations, right? So just to review, the Talmud either means that if the Mashiach is from the dead, it's Daniel. And the word kagon, like, just ignore it. Or if you're looking for a paradigm in the messianic personality, then it's like someone like Daniel. Okay, then the word kagon, like, means what it says, like. It's an example of the paradigm of the messianic personality. So long as Bruce says, why does Rashi offer both explanations? Particularly since one of those explanations is philosophically problematic, right? Because if you say that if the Mashiach is from the dead and you're really looking for Mashiach, so, and you say it's Daniel, that means you're gonna have to bind to a sort of a second coming theory. And if you do that, you're gonna have to, the word kagon, like, you're not gonna take it at face value, all right? You're just gonna say it's Daniel. Why not just offer the other explanation, which is in a sense less problematic, to say, if you're looking for an example of the messianic personality, it's kagon, it's like Daniel. So that way we don't have to get involved in second coming issues. And we can interpret the word kagon in the normal way. Why not just offer that explanation? That was Bruce's question. Okay, so the truth of the matter is that I hope people appreciate the question. It's a really good question. I just want to tease it out just a bit, because Bruce's question was typical of how one should analyze any time Rashi, or for that matter, any commentator, offers two explanations. Why would any commentator offer two explanations? Rashi's not the only one who does this. The Ramban does it, Ibn Ezra does it. All the famous medieval commentators will sometimes offer two explanations. The standard methodology in Talmud study for that type of explanation, where you have two different interpretations, is that each of the two explanations has a strength and a weakness. If one of those two explanations was better than the other, then the commentator should have just offered the better explanation. The fact that two explanations were offered must mean that it's sort of a toss-up, because each of those explanations has a strength, but each one has a weakness. And each one is a different strength and a different weakness. And so that's why Rashi or any other commentator might offer two different explanations. So that's very fundamental in terms of methodology of how we analyze these things. Now what I'd like to do is see if we can answer Bruce's question. So why would Rashi offer two explanations? So it occurred to, Arthur wants to.
All right, if I'll try it if you don't mind. Rashi says, if the Mashiach
By the way, Arthur, just, I noticed for some reason, like at least what I'm seeing now is your face, the only face on the big face on the screen, but I didn't see it when I was speaking.
Right, because you didn't see your face?
I saw it, but just as a small box on the top, not as.
Yeah, because, all right, you may be in a slightly different mode than I am, but supposedly we're recording in speaker mode.
Go ahead.
Okay. When Rashi says, if the Mashiach has already come, you have to remember that before, in the Gemara, Rav rejects the fact that the Mashiach has already come and died. In other words, he's rejecting it. So if Rashi is saying, if the Mashiach already come, people are going to point to, well, in the Gemara it says right before that, Mashiach didn't come, how can you ignore the other opinion? That's why he brings multiple opinions.
Are you referring to the Gemara that we saw?
In Sanhedrin 98 bit. There's a Gemara about them discussing it.
Okay, so the truth of the matter is, I'd have to look at that Gemara.
Okay.
Because it's not fresh in my mind. So
because Rav, who basically explicitly rejects the fact that the notion that the Mashiach has already come. So Rashi is basically covering all bases here. So he gives one explanation and the other. So if you reject this first explanation because Rav says the Mashiach didn't come yet, then you have a second explanation.
Wait a second. I mean, first of all, I'd have to see that statement of Rav. Okay, so I have to do my homework on that.
Okay.
I don't want, and I just promised everybody, whatever I find, I'm not going to spend another shear on it. I'll speak to Arthur privately. But what I don't understand about what you're suggesting is, according to what you're saying, remember both of these. It's Rav's statement who says, well, if he's from the living, it's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. That was his Rebbe, by the way. Right? That's the idea there. And if he's from the dead, it's Daniel.
That's in Brachot.
So if in fact Rav himself has elsewhere, which I have to verify, rejected the possibility the Mashiach has already been alive, then I don't understand how Rashi could even possibly offer an interpretation of Rav himself,
Right.
which suggests the opposite, right? So that wouldn't explain the two positions. Okay, so
Plus, in an historical context, I would think Rashi would want to very clearly demarcate those other religion guys that he's living in Europe from our perspective of Mashiach, of why we don't hold by theirs.
okay.
And therefore, for sure not mention this other perspective.
Okay, so that's actually, that's sort of part of your question, Bruce. In other words, you're troubled by why even raise an interpretation which is so theologically problematic.
Right.
Okay, so the truth matters. I'm not going to lose so much sleep over that because, I think I talked about this a little bit last week. Not every Christian doctrine per se is wrong. I have to, as we discussed last week, that Christianity is a derivative of Judaism, so it could have certain elements that are theologically maybe not mainstream, but are possible. Okay, so maybe like the Abarbanel thinks it's possible that the Mashiach will be alive, and someone should should mute themselves, wherever Jay is.
But you could say the Christians misinterpreted our source. And again, Rashi would want to focus how they have misinterpreted our source, because for sure it's not Anun who died.
Wait
they
a second.
misinterpreted.
Wait a second. So we already saw the Abarbanel says explicitly, right, that it is a theoretical
He's long after Rashi.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. The point is that it's a theological possibility. It's a theoretical possibility. So I don't think we have to necessarily feel compelled by that. But let me just take a step back, okay? Because I think there's an.
I have a question to ask.
Go ahead.
How, if Mashiach was here, we're not going to be dying anymore. We'll be living forever.
That's what you think.
Huh? That's what I learned when I was going in Shiva. That's what they used to say.
Yeah, not everybody agrees with that, including the Rambam. We'll see that. You'd be surprised. I have a big surprise for you. Okay, what you thought is not necessarily, it ain't necessarily so. Okay, but we'll return to that. Okay, you'll see. I promise you. Okay, now, so what I wanted now to do is to take a step back and forget about the politics and about the earth-shattering theological problems of second coming, etc., but just technical. I want to approach this technically. I want to do something that Arthur was doing, but not specifically, and that is I want to look at the context. Okay, the context of the discussion is, what is the name of Mashiach? Right, that's the immediate above context. What's the name of the Mashiach? So there's a whole bunch of suggestions. What is the name of the Mashiach? Now, the Gemara is not saying what's an example of a messianic name. It's saying, what is the Mashiach's name? Fine. So when the Gemara then discusses, well, if you're looking for the Mashiach among the living, it would be out of character to somehow say that the question is, if you're looking for an example of the messianic personality, someone who has the traits of the messianic personality, that's not the context of discussion. The context of discussion is, what's the Mashiach's name? And then the Gemara says, and if you're looking for Mashiach among the living, it's Rabbi Yonasi. That's Rob, right? If you're looking for Mashiach among the dead, it's Daniel. So it seems to be, in the context, it's a stretch to say, if you're looking for among the dead, it means if you're looking for an example of the messianic personality. That's not the simple reading, especially in light of context. When it says, if from the dead, he is Daniel. The simplest reading of that in context, and by the way, even the simplest reading of the words, if from the dead, it doesn't mean if you're looking for an example of the messianic personality from the dead. All those words have to be added in for that interpretation. The straightforward meaning of those words, if from the dead, both in terms of those words and contextually, is if you're looking for Mashiach among the dead, period. Now, so that is the strongest reading of that phrase. The only problem is the weakness of that reading is the word kagon. What are you going to do with the word which means like? Then it's like Daniel. So on the one hand, if I say that Daniel was Mashiach, right, and it means it literally, the strength of that is it's supported by the context and it's supported by the literal meaning of the phrase. Weakness is I have to interpret kagon as being like just erase the word kagon. Like Rashi says, lav dafka, don't take it too seriously, the word kagon, like. On the other hand, let's do the opposite. I don't want to play fast and loose with the word kagon. The word kagon means like. So if I translate the word kagon literally, which is an advantage, I'm not erasing it, but then that forces me to interpret the first part. If he's from the dead, he's like Daniel. It would mean, if he's from the dead, means someone who has messianic characteristics. I'm looking not for the Mashiach, so messianic characteristics. So that's sort of a very classic way of understanding the two approaches in Rashi. Each approach has an advantage. One approach, the phrase "if from the dead" is taken in a more natural sense, more literally, and more contextually appropriate. The problem is the word kagon, like, can't be taken literally. You have to erase it essentially. On the other hand, if I interpret the word kagon, like, in the simplest possible way, it forces me to then take the question of if he's from the dead, who is it? It means if, like, right, meaning someone who has the messianic characteristics. So that would be the best I've been able to come up with so far of understanding the two possible positions. Now, just so you'll appreciate how seriously I take these things. So I've been a member of the Rabbinical Council of America, even though I don't live in America anymore. But I'm a dues-paying member, not of the Communist Party, but of Rabbinical Council of America. And we have a chat list, which is pretty interesting. So this is the largest Orthodox rabbinic organization in the world, the RCA, Rabbinical Council of America. And we can talk to each other, it's a chat list, post, question, comment, article. So I posted this question. And I think it's fascinating that I got about 8-10 answers. Every single one, except for one, ignored my question and right away addressed the problematics of Chabad in terms of declaring the Rebbe to be Messiah. Just completely ignored my question and right away hopped into the controversy. I don't know if it says anything about rabbis there. They like controversy, I don't know what. And nobody addressed my question. So finally, I reposted my question. And I said, gentlemen, I'm so grateful that you responded, but you didn't answer my question. I wasn't really asking, in terms of that question, about the Lubavitcher Rebbe per se or Chabad. I was asking a technical learning question. When Rashi offers 2 explanations, just technically speaking, why is he offering 2 explanations? There's got to be a strength and a weakness in each of the explanations. And what are they? So one person then wrote me, but privately, off list. And he said that he didn't want to get involved because he happens to be a Lubavitcher. So he didn't get involved the first time. But now that I've clarified, which I thought I was clear the first time, but now that I've clarified that I'm asking a alumnus question. It's a technical question. It has nothing to do with, per se, the controversy in Chabad. You could apply it, but per se, it's how you learn. That's a standard question. So he then wrote a beautiful analysis, really beautiful, which I'm not going to share with you, of the issue. And then he also happened to talk about the controversy with Chabad, and we ended up having a back and forth, and it was really a very satisfying conversation with him, and really impressive analysis that he gave both of the Gemara and of the critique of Chabad from a very sane and sober Chabad perspective. It was really interesting. You can make a whole shiur out of what he had to say. Maybe we'll do that someday. I have to ask for his permission. But just to give you an example of how seriously I take these things, and devoted a lot of psychic energy into it. Okay, fine. So that's leftovers from that particular topic. Now we're going to move on to address an issue which was already raised by one of our distinguished Kollel members, and that is, wait a second, when Mashiach comes, no one's going to die. Right? That was a suggestion just a few minutes ago by one of our distinguished members. So, and I said, not so fast, Kowalski. Not so simple. So we're now going to ask the question in a more general sense, and that is, what's going to look like when Mashiach comes? What's the world going to look like? So if you'll turn to the first packet, okay, and it's page 8 in the first packet. And let's take a look at a famous Gemara, Masechet Brachot. We're just going to take a look at one line. It's in the second line of the Hebrew text. The Amar Rabbi Shmuel, that Shmuel said the following, very famous sentence: Ein bein haolam hazeh limot Mashiach. There's no difference between this world that we live in right now, which presumably is in Shmuel's time at least, is the non-messianic world, right? No difference between that world, limot Mashiach, and the messianic world, ela shibud malchuyot bilvad, except for subjugation to the nations. Meaning, well, what does it mean? Look at his proof text. His proof text is really important. He quotes from pasuk from Devarim. Ki lo yachdal evyon mikerav haaretz. The poor will never cease from the land. What does that have to do with anything? So apparently, what Shmuel is saying, since the Torah promises us that the poor will never cease from the land, like never, even in messianic times. So wait a second, Mashiach's going to come, and they're going to be poor people, right? Knocking on your door at night, right? Tzedakah, coming around in shul, right? So wait a second, what kind of messianic period is that? That's a little disappointing. So Shmuel says, you see from here that in terms of the world being the Garden of Eden, doesn't seem like it. There'll still be poor people. So it must be that there's some other feature which will distinguish the world as it is right now and the messianic world. And what is that? It'll be the restitution of Jewish sovereignty, the creation of a Jewish sovereign nation. Now, I would assume that Shmuel includes in that, and we'll explore this further in just a minute, other aspects that we associate that are explicitly from the prophets. Jews will come to live in Israel. We'll build a nice building on the Temple Mount. That'll be the Beit HaMikdash, etc. But there'll still be poor people, and there'll still be a lot of other things that are associated with the world as we recognize it right now. It's the Rambam who takes this phrase that there's no distinction between this world and the messianic world other than subjugation of nations, meaning we won't be subject to nations, we'll be sovereign in our own land and strong, etc. So he takes this and runs with it. Let's take a look at how the Rambam, very famous Rambam here, describes what you shouldn't think about what it's going to look like when Mashiach comes. Al ya'aleh al halev shibamot Mashiach yivtal davar min hago shalom. It shouldn't even enter your mind. He actually says heart, but he means mind. It shouldn't enter your mind that in the days of Mashiach, anything from the normal functioning of the world will cease to exist. No. Oh yeah, sham chidush b'ma'aseh breshit, or there'll be some type of alteration in the laws of creation. No. Ella olam kimin hago noheg. The world will function in its normal, orderly manner, meaning all the laws of nature, the way the world functions as it is now, that will be what the era of Mashiach will look like. I see a lot of disappointed faces out there. Everybody's hoping for something amazing, right? The Beit HaMikdash, etc. Okay, there will be a Beit HaMikdash. But
when the Rambam says this, is this after Techiyat HaMeitim also, according to the Rambam?
So he doesn't mention Techiyat HaMeitim right here. We'll discuss that. That becomes a very big problem. I hope you can start to see, as Bruce just did, that one could be concerned if you're going to be asserting that the messianic period is completely natural. What about the resurrection of the dead? That's not particularly natural, right? So we'll get to that. That has to be a fascinating issue. We're going to get to that. Now, there's a big problem because what we know about the messianic era is a function of what the prophet said about the messianic era. Well, let's take a look at what the prophet said about the messianic era. As the Rambam himself, he knew Tanach very well. He quotes, V'zeh shenemar b'Yeshaya. And that, what it says in the prophet Isaiah, Vigar ze'ev im keves, very famous pasuk. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. V'namer im gedi yirbatz, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid. Now, let's just go to the Jerusalem Zoo. It's a very fine zoo for those who haven't been there. And if I were to put a wolf and a lamb in the same cage, and I come back the next day, what would be there? There would be the wolf licking his chops, right? There'd be no lamb, right? So when Yeshayahu says the wolf shall lie with the lamb, that obviously, one might think, reflects this idea that there's going to be a fundamental change in natural law, or else how could the wolf lie down with the lamb, as it says in Yeshayahu? The Rambam says, don't lose sleep over this. Mashal v'chida. It's simply metaphorical. You're kidding. If it's metaphorical, what does it mean? So he's going to explain. Inyan hadavar. What's the matter here? Sheyusrael yoshvim lavetach im rishei goyim hamishulim kazei v'namer. It said the Jewish people will dwell securely with the evil among the nations who are compared to a wolf and a leopard. It's a metaphor. It means we're going to have tzahal. We're going to have Tzva Haganah Yisrael, the Israel Defense Forces, and it's going to be a very powerful army. And we're going to dwell securely in our land. The enemies are going to give up as they realize they can't get rid of us. And they're going to recognize the rightfulness of our cause. You know, you might think, well, isn't that a miracle? No, people change their minds. There are countries that were at war with each other, right? America, Japan, America and Germany, etc., that become best of friends, right? It can happen in the way of nature. And so when it says that the wolf shall lie with the lamb, it's a metaphor for the Jewish people living in peace among the rest of the nations. And he quotes Psukim, where it's very clear that the notion of a wolf or a leopard is image for the enemies of the Jewish people. He quotes from the prophet Yirmiyahu. We don't have to read that. He's just proving to you that those words, wolf or a leopard, can be a metaphor for enemies of the Jewish people. And then the Rambam goes on. I just skipped a couple lines. V'yachzeru chulam l'dat ha'emet. All of those former enemies of the Jewish people, they will all return to the true dot. By the way, it's a very interesting word. So in modern Hebrew, dot, daled taf, right? Not dot, not daled ayin taf. So you say he's dati. What does that mean? Right, he's religious. Dat in the Rambam doesn't always mean that, right? Dat in the Rambam usually means law. So they'll return to the true law. I don't think the Rambam means that all the nations become Jewish. Right? It means that they will observe the 7 Noahide laws, right? The part of the true law which recognizes, which it addresses the non-Jews. Velo yigzalu, velo yashchitu, and those nations won't plunder and destroy, right? They'll be a decent world, be like Canada and the United States. You know, 2 countries that live side by side and in peace. Ella yochlu davar hamutar benachat im Yisrael, that the nations will make a living in an honest way and live among the Jews in a global cooperative environment. So to everything else that you find in the prophets which looks supernatural, it's not to be taken literally. It's all a mashal. It's a metaphor. Now, right now, we can't always decipher what is the symbolic message of a particular passage in the prophets, which seems to be supernatural. But when Mashiach comes, we'll say, I never understood what that passage in Yechezkel meant. When Mashiach comes, you'll figure it all out. But but right now, we can already understand, based upon the Rambam, based upon Shmuel, right, that the messianic era will be completely natural, and anything in the prophets which seems to challenge that should be and must be interpreted in a metaphorical fashion. And now he goes on to quote Shmuel. Amru chachamim ein bein olam hazeh limot haMashiach el shibud malchut bilvad. As our sages said, that there's no difference between this world and the messianic world except for subjugation to the nations. We'll have Jewish sovereignty. By the way, it's pretty interesting to note, it's not the first time I've seen the Rambam do this. Instead of saying, as Shmuel said, he says, Amru Chachamim, the sages said. I just want to point out that I dare not criticize the Rambam, but I have seen him more than once where he'll take one opinion, which could even be a minority opinion, and he'll say, Amru Chachamim, right? He did this, by the way, we saw an example of this when he was discussing Rabbi Akiva's declaration of Bar Kokhba as Mashiach. The Rambam said explicitly, Rabbi Akiva and all the sages of his generation. Not so clear to me that all the sages of his generation. There are a lot of historians that think a lot of the sages weren't too thrilled about Bar Kokhba. So it is interesting. The Rambam has a tendency for polemical purposes to kind of generalize. Instead of saying Shmuel says, he says, Amru Chachamim, the sages say. Okay. Now, as we've mentioned in the past, the Rambam had an older contemporary colleague, Rabbi Avram ben David, the Ravid, lived in southern France. The Ravid, there's been a lot of historical analyses about the Ravid. The only thing we know for sure is the Ravid wrote a often blistering commentary on the Rambam. What was behind that? You know, it always bothers me when historians he was jealous. He was like sort of psychoanalyze people who lived 800 years ago. It's a big iffy kind of endeavor. But we do know that he wrote this commentary, and it's very critical. If you look in any standard edition of the Rambam, you'll find in the margins, it's actually sort of inserted in the text, the commentary of the Ravid, Rabbi Avram ben David of Post-Gear. You have to have also very good eyes because it's printed very small. Take a look at the next source. This is the Ravid's comment on what the Rambam just said. So he says the following. Does it not say in the Torah, I will give the land respite from vicious beasts? So the Ravid says the Rambam is not right. Because the Torah itself, forget about the prophets. So even if you could interpret the prophets, the later prophets, in some kind of metaphorical, symbolic fashion, we have a passage in the Torah which clearly and unmistakably says the Rambam is wrong. Because it says in the Torah that when the Mashiach comes, I will give the land respite from vicious beasts. Now, in order to appreciate what he's talking about, you have to turn the page.
You think that that's a supernatural comment? I mean, that's
you're going to find out. That's why we're turning the page. Okay. So let's take a look at this passage from Vayikra. Torah says the following. I'll just read quickly the first part in English. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, Hashem says, I will grant your rains in their seasons, so that the earth shall yield its produce and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. So the assumption here is that this is describing the messianic period. I will grant peace in the land. This definitely sounds messianic. And you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. Wow, even by the Internal Revenue Service? This is incredible. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. Right? Peace has arrived. You shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. Anybody who stands against you, they'll run away. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000. Your enemy shall fall before you by the sword. So this is, according to the Ravid, a picture of the messianic future. Now, we're about to see a fascinating midrash, which analyzes this passage in the Talmud, particularly the phrase when it says, I will give the land respite from vicious beasts. In Hebrew, v'hishpati chaya ra'at min haaretz. Okay? Now, I want to point out something, a little grammar, before we dig into this midrash. V'hishpati. Can anybody tell me the 3-letter root of that word? V'hishpati. Shin, bet, taf. Like Shabbos? Okay, fine. Now, I'll ask another question for all of you grammarians out there. What binyan is that root in? Okay, it's hifil. It means to cause something to have a Shabbos. Like we get rid of chametz, lahashpit, to get rid of. It means to get rid of. To cause it not to be, lahashpit. Hifil. Now, let's look at this midrash. V'hishbati chaya ra'a mina aretz. It quotes the pasuk. I'm going to give these animals a Shabbos. Okay, I'll give the land respite. Okay, from vicious beasts. You notice, by the way, it actually, in the Hebrew grammar, it's the reason I asked those questions. In the way it's translated in English, the object of Hashem's action is the land. I will give the land respite. That's not the Hebrew. The Hebrew is v'hishpati chaya ra'ah. Whatever hishpati means, the object of that action is chay ra'ah, the wild animal. Just important to bear that in mind. Okay, grammatically, everybody got that? Okay, so let's go on the midrash. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, so Rabbi Yehuda says the following. Ma'aviram min ha'olam, that Hashem is going to cause them to pass from the world. No lions, tigers, and bears. Not going to be around. No lions, tigers, and bears. Then the Gemara has a second opinion, or the Midrash has a second opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer, mashbitan shelo yizoku. Rabbi Shimon says, no, look at the grammar. It's not that Hashem is going to give the land respite. Hashem is going to give the animals, can do something to the animals. So Rabbi Shimon says it means Hashem is going to give them Shabbos, right, so that they don't damage. Now, let's just put it in simple language. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there will be no lions and tigers and bears when Mashiach comes. That's what the Torah says. V'yishpati charab min haaretz. I will give land respite from vicious beasts. Rabbi Shimon says no. It means there will be lions and tigers and bears, but they won't be scary. They won't be damaging. You could have a pet lion, tiger, and bear. And I know during the lockdown, most of you spent your time watching Tiger King or whatever that thing was called on Netflix, right? So obviously that guy was trying to experience the messianic era right now, according to Rabbi Shimon. That you could live with lions and tigers and bears right now because they're going to be non-damaging. Shelo yizoku. Hashem is going to do something about with their nature. So now Rabbi Shimon tries to show he's right, that the nature of lions and tigers and bears is going to change. I'm Rabbi Shimon. Eimatai hu shivcho shemakom. What is the bigger praise of God? We're trying to praise God. You know, wow, Hashem, you're going to make this incredible world. You know, I'm going to give the land respite from vicious beasts. So what's the greater praise of God? Bizman she'ein mezikin. Is it when the vicious beasts are gone? They're not there. One scenario. That's the reading of Rabbi Yehuda. Oh, bizman she'esh mezikin. Or on the other hand, the scenario of there will be vicious beasts. Vein mezikin, but they won't be vicious. They won't damage. Which one is more impressive? So obviously, from Rabbi Shimon's perspective, it's a much more impressive thing that there'll be lions and tigers and bears walking down the streets of Efrat, but you go up and pet them. You'll say, Shalom Aleichem, Yikina with a lion. They'll be in the Efrat Kollel, which will exist certainly during Messianic times. Okay, so this is this dispute between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Shimon then goes on and he says that his understanding of I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, that it means that there will be vicious beasts, but they won't be vicious. Right? They're all going to be Shabbos observing. They're going to be very docile. They won't do anything the entire week. Hang on a second, Bruce. So then he quotes the same pasuk from Yeshayahu, that the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. And he says, you see, Yeshayahu says it, that the wolf will lie with the lamb, meaning there will be wolves, lions and tigers and bears, but they will coexist with each other and with us and everything to be peaceful. So you see when it says that I will give respite to the land from the vicious beasts, it means that the fundamental nature of nature will change. Hashem is going to alter nature. And that's Rabbi Shimon's proof from that pasuk. And that's what the Ravid, Bruce, was referring to in his very short way, saying, Rambam, how could you say what you're saying? It says in the Torah, V'hishpati chayaram min haaretz, I will give the land respite from vicious beasts. Because that means that God is going to allow for the vicious beasts to be there. It's just that their fundamental nature is going to change. And this is an explicit proof from the Torah against the Rambam. Yes.
So can't we say that they just couldn't imagine a zoo where the land does have respite from wild beasts because they're living in a zoo, and literally the lion and the wolf and the sheep and the whatever, they're literally lying next to each other. There's no change in nature whatsoever, because we've created an animal environment that does give respite to the land in general and allows them to be animals as they're animals in the zoo.
Yeah. Are you saying that because they're in separate cages?
Yeah.
But they're just adjacent?
Right. They're lying next to each other,
Okay,
and there's no change in their nature.
Yeah.
And
So
you feed them there, and the land has respite.
Yeah.
No one worries about them. And we even
Right.
go visit them, and they look very nice.
Okay. So I hear what you're saying. The only problem is I think it's very far-fetched to assume that that's what Yeshayahu meant, that they'll lie down with each other. They'll be neighbors in separate, good fences make good neighbors. Good cages make good
Well,
in
if
the
he's,
zoo.
if he's seeing
make
the
good
future as a
neighbors.
nevuah, he can't imagine a zoo, but that's what he's describing. Why
So,
not?
because it's a very forced, with all due respect, that'd be a very forced reading of Yeshayahu, right? The Yeshayahu seems to say that something amazing is going to take place. The question is how amazing. So just remember, by the way, what would if the Rambam were talking to the Ravid, right? The Ravid just insulted the Rambam. Now you idiot! How can you say what you're saying? It says, and I will give the land respite from vicious beasts. So look at the Medrash, right? It means that they're going to be vicious beasts, but they won't be vicious. So you see, nature's going to change. The Rambam would say, "Oh man, ask me a hard question." Like, no sweat. He would even say, "Mr. Ravid, are you illiterate? Did you read what I even said?" Because the Rambam already dealt with it. What does the Rambam do with the pasuk from Yeshayahu that that the wolf and the lamb will lie together? He says
it's a metaphor.
It's a metaphor. So you don't have to go with the parallel cages thing. It's a lot easier to say the whole thing's a metaphor. So, and furthermore, if the Ravid says, "Yeah, very nice, but what about the Medrash?" The Rambam says, Medrash, I have no problem with it, because you're poskening like Rabbi Shimon. I'm poskening like, help me out, Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it's not that their nature is going to change, it's just they won't be an Efrat. Hashem's going to get rid of them. It's not that their nature is going to change. So the claim of the Ravid is not particularly compelling because the Ravid is holding like one opinion that's already in the time of the Tanaim. But the Rambam would say, I'm holding like the other period. I would just point out that you sort of wonder, like, why is the Rabbi getting so excited? Because there's a fairly straightforward answer to the Ravid's claim, and that is, I hold like Rabbi Yehuda, not like Rabbi Shimon. And the Psukim in Yeshayahu are to be understood metaphorically, as the Rambam, have already stated. So it could be the following. One of the great struggles in learning Gemara is if you're trying to figure out what the halacha is, because the Gemara doesn't very often say, and the halacha is. It sometimes does, right? But many times doesn't. Maybe most of the time doesn't. How do the poskim figure out what the halacha is? So a lot of different ways. But one of the ways they try to figure out is look at the entire discussion, see if the editor of the Talmud seems to incline more towards one view than the other. Both views are presented, but one view, if you look at the total discussion, seems to have more sympathy in the way the entire discussion is presented. So interesting. So you see the Medrash here? I have it on page 10 here. That's a long Medrash here. So look how much space Rabbi Yehuda's view gets in the Medrash. Like Rabbi Yehuda just says, right, that it means that Hashem is going to get rid of the beasts. That's all it means. No change in nature. Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's ridiculous. What kind of praise of God is that? It's going to be impressive because the whole nature of beasts is going to change. And then he quotes these psukim from the prophets, right? And so on and so forth, all the way through the end. So I can imagine the Ravid saying, look, Mr. Rambam, there's halacha. And halacha also has to do with how you think about things philosophically. And also we have to poskin those questions. You're relying upon a minority view in the Medrash. I understand there's a view of Rabbi Yehuda, but you can see from the way the Medrash lays out the discussion, it's much more sympathetic. There's a lot more airtime spent on Rabbi Shimon, not on Rabbi Yehuda. So the Medrash, as it were, even though Rabbi Yehuda's view is presented, it's not how we poskin. So I'd imagine the Ravid might be able to answer something like that. Okay, now watch this. Really fascinating. I want to show you, we'll have to do this kind of fast. I want to show you how the Ramban, Nachmanides, understands that pasuk. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts. The Hishpati Chayara Ra'aminards. So turn to page 10. This is Ramban, Nachmanides, not Maimonides, not Ramban. I will cause evil beasts to cease out of the land. That's the translation there. Yeah, we were used, I will give land respite from vicious beasts, same thing. Now look what he does. The Ramban, Nachmanides, quotes right away our Medrash. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who said that he will remove them from the world entirely, the verse is to be understood in its plain sense. The evil beasts will not come into the land. Their nature won't change. He's quoting Rabbi Yehuda, right? The vision which seems to support the Rambam, interestingly enough. You'll see he changes his mind in a second. And what does it mean? The nature of the vicious beast is not going to change. It's just that they won't be in Efrat. And he makes a very compelling case for that. For since there will be plenitude and an abundance of blessings, and the cities will be full of people, wild beasts will not come into inhabited places. This is actually a fact. As a former zoologist, I was actually a zoology major for a little while. So we saw this recently. You know, when shutdowns took place all over the world during because of Corona, there were all these animals were like walking down the streets in different places in the world. There's like videos about this, right? Why? So believe it or not, you know, animals don't like us, except for our dogs. They love us. That's why we like them. Somebody's got to love us. Okay.
Well, people eat them. They have what to be worried about.
I'm sorry?
I mean, people try to kill them and eat them. They have what to be worried about.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not justified. Just pointing out they don't like us. So when you have a big city, it's all concrete. There's cars and buses and people walking around. The lions and tigers and bears will go elsewhere. And that's all the Rabbi Yehuda means, according to Ramban. It's a completely naturalistic explanation. The Torah is just saying, since there will be so much prosperity, that Efrat, which used to be a barren hillside, is now a flourishing metropolis, right? So whatever animals used to walk around on that hill, you don't see them much anymore because they go elsewhere, and that's the way of the world.
Is this atypical for the Ramban?
Okay, we're not done. You'll see. You'll see. And then he says, according to Rabbi Shimon, now he has the second view. Rabbi Shimon is the supernatural view, right? That means the animal's nature will change. And according to Rabbi Shimon, who says that he will cause them to cease from causing harm, there will be lions and tigers and bears, and they will be in Efrat. It's just they'll be your pets, just like your puppies are now. The verse is stating, and I will cause the evil of the beast to cease out of the land. When it says, V'hishpati chaya ra'ah mina aretz, it means, Hishpati, I will cause to cease the ra'ah, the evil, the vicious parts of the chaya, of the animal. That's how you read the pasuk. I will cause the viciousness of the beast to cease out of the land. And now, the Ramban, well, which view does he like better? The naturalistic view of Rabbi Yehuda, interpreting that pasuk in the Torah, or the supernatural view of Rabbi Shimon? So look what the Ramban says. And this is the correct interpretation. He paskins, not surprisingly, like Rabbi Shimon, like the Ravid, right? That when it says that God is going to get rid of the evil beasts, it doesn't mean he's going to get rid of the evil beasts, get rid of the evil in the beasts. And there will be a fundamental change in nature. And now he says something beautiful. This is the correct interpretation for when Israel observes the commandments. The land of Israel be like the world was at its beginning, the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, before the sin of the first man. His conception of the messianic era is, this is a very good now, tight understanding of how the Kabbalists understood the Messiah. It's a return to the Garden of Eden before the sin, when no wild beast or creeping thing would kill a man. Just as the rabbis have said, it is not the wild ass that kills, but it is the sin that kills. The reason that, and this is fascinating, what happened after the sin? Before the sin, there were lions and tigers and bears in the Garden of Eden, and they were so mellow yellow. They were all from California. they were all smoking pot all day long and couldn't get themselves to do anything productive, okay? And much less bite anybody. After the sin, man's sin then changed the whole nature of the cosmos. Animals only became vicious as a function of the distortion of reality, which we injected into reality as a result of our sin. You can see how this is very Kabbalistic. Like, how does us doing something wrong affect the fundamental warp of reality? Well, it does. It is because of this that Scripture says, and the suckling shall play on the hole of the asp, and similarly the cow and the bear shall feed, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. This is the passage of the lamb and the wolf, etc. You know, when they live together in peace, it's because they'll be in the Garden of Eden again before the sin. The wolf's not going to eat the lamb because he's going to be a vegetarian, like everybody else. For dangerous beasts only prey on human beings on account of the sin of man, because of which it was decreed upon them that he be a prey to their teeth. And preying was made a part of their nature, so they also prey on each other. Even animals, the way they relate to each other, are only violent towards each other because of our sin. Once we correct that and go to the Garden of Eden again, before the sin, they will not prey on each other. They'll spend all their day praying, in the sense of davening, but not praying with an E. As is well known for having once preyed on man, they add to this tendency that of preying on animals, so they become more harmful. And then he quotes some more psukim. And just at the end there, it was only afterwards that they learned to prey on account of human sin, which causes death, as I have explained. Okay. Now, we'll have to pause here, but we ain't done. But what you see here, just to review, is that there is a fundamental dispute between Rambam and Ramban, which goes back to the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And other Rishonim hop into the fray, like the Ravid, on how to conceive of the Messianic era. Obviously, from the Rambam's perspective, Shmuel is holding like Rabbi Yehuda as well. So this dispute about if the Messianic era will be supernatural or natural already goes back to the period of the Tanaim as a function of how to interpret the pasuk, V'hishbati chaya ra min haaretz. I will give the land rest from vicious beasts. And I'll just take a quick question. And then we'll go on.
You may not be able to answer it in the time allotted, but I'm just wondering, the interpretation of this pasuk has nothing to do with Mashiach, because if you look at Bechukotai, you're going to see that it starts off with, if you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments. So, and then it lists a whole bunch of things, granting of rain, having a good harvest, and peace in the land, and the animals, the ferocious animals won't be there or won't be bothering you. But then it also goes to 5 will change, your enemies will be vanquished, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's this have to do with Mashiach? This is if we, the Jewish people, listen, learn, and observe the laws, this is what we get.
Yeah. Okay. It's a really good question. I was actually thinking that as we read through it, like you could potentially just say, this is completely irrelevant. It's talking about now. So clearly the Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon did think of this as talking about the Messianic era, right? That's clear. That doesn't solve your problem. Like, what forces them? So I'm not 100% sure, and this will be part of my homework again for next week. I would just say very quickly that I wonder if there's a sort of cynicism behind the assumption. That is, come on, a period in which the Jews, all are faithful to the Torah, and there's peace in the land, and we
see it in degrees. We see it in degrees, though.
Oh, in degrees. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but still. So that wouldn't refute the idea that since the description here is of a really an existence which is hard to imagine with our current familiarity with what human beings are like and the way the world is now. if this could be accomplished, that would indeed be messianic. I think that's probably the basic assumption, but I'm going to look into it more because I think it's a very good question. Okay, we'll pause here.
Just quickly also, if the Rambam likes to be the rationalist, then he's coming to the text from that perspective. And if the Ramban likes to be more metaphysical or Kabbalistic, then it seems he approaches the text similarly. And I'm wondering how then we get to the truth if they're coming to these texts from a particular perspective.
Okay. Yeah, so very quickly, because I know that Chaim is about to speak. So first of all, I agree with your hypothesis, and that is we don't read the text in a vacuum. Everybody has their interpretive lenses on. So a rationalist reads it one way, and a Kabbalist reads it another way. From our perspective, and this is what you're really asking is, we don't know what the truth is. But what I'd like to see from this, the conclusion is, guess what? Judaism really is, and even Orthodoxy is a big tent. You can be a Kabbalist and you can be a rationalist. And sometimes I even think those are two separate religions. Sometimes the distinctions are so great. And there's room enough for both of us because these biblical texts can be interpreted either way just fine. And there's no way for us, at least at this point, to know the truth of what these psukim actually mean. So on that note, I wish you a wonderful week and a beautiful Shabbos, and we'll continue next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.